up, YouTube? Just got some parts in for the Warrior 350. My dad had given it back to me, said it was having some trouble starting and not running. The rear brakes weren't doing very good. So I just rebuilt the carb and checked it out. It needed some things. I could tell the clutch was going out. And I just wanted to basically give it a little bit more of a tune-up, get it running. Here's a look at the parts I got for Dad's Warrior. I got the clutch kit and a clutch cover gasket with the clutch spring set. Start pulling this stuff out and take a quick look. Okay, the first thing that came out the box is the Tusk clutch gasket. Second thing out the box, Tusk clutch kit. These are the clutch plates. Third thing out the box, the clutch springs. So this together, these three items, this makes up the entire clutch kit. So I'm just going to be taking off the Nerf bar, foot peg, brake pedal, and that side cover there. First thing I'm going to do is drain the oil out. But before I do any of that, I'm actually going to put the pads here on oil, because you're supposed to soak them before you use them. And so what you want to do is soak them so they get completely saturated in oil before you install them. So normally I do this the night before, but kind of in a hurry. I want to get these installed. So I'm just going to go ahead and soak them while I'm removing the case and the Nerf bar. So Tusk actually has a little disclaimer there at the bottom. They want you to smear the oil on the plates and then slip the clutch when you first get the engine running. This is the Valvoline motorcycle oil 1040 I use, and it just says right on the bottom there, this is the most important part, is that it says for wet clutch protection. So you just want to make sure you use an oil that's safe for wet clutches. Couple of other parts that came in the mail. Here's my new O-ring for the oil cap and a new oil cap. So you can see how stripped out the old one was versus the new one. I think it was totally worth it to buy a new one. These are only about $5 or $10 on eBay. $5 without the O-ring, $10 with the new O-ring, I think. In my opinion, it's totally worth it to just put it back on there. You know you're going to be changing your oil. Might as well just do it right. Get rid of the stripped cap, put a new one on there. Hopefully this is the right size. It looks like it is. I ordered it based on part number. Just want to double check though that it's the correct threads. And it looks like it is. So even though I'm not ready to put the new oil back in yet, I'm going to go ahead and just put my drain pin in now. Not over torque it. I believe the correct socket is a 19 millimeter. Alright, so here's our clutch basket. You can see the clutch basket, and here's the clutch plates that stack in there. Here's the clutch springs, and here's the screws that hold the clutch springs in. You can see there's a bearing in the middle there, and this is what, when you push the clutch in from the outside, that's where it presses. It presses right in the center there, and that's what essentially takes the force off of all of these plates and allows it to slip. When you pull the clutch in, that's what you're doing. You're slipping the clutch. So you're essentially compressing this in, which then presses all of these apart and slips them. When they're released, the springs hold them all pressed together as a stack, and a clutch pack is what they call it, inside of the clutch basket. So under release, when you've released the clutch, when you let go of the handle, that lets the springs press all of the plates together, and that's what gives you the friction to move forward. When you compress the clutch handle, you're pressing in here, which is releasing all of the tension that's on those plates. So as you press in here, when you squeeze, it presses the inside of the case right there. You can see that rod is linked to that, which is where your clutch cable comes down. So when you pull that clutch cable, it rotates that rod right there, which rotates that little gear, which presses this little rod in right here. That rod presses right here, which is what takes all the pressure off of your clutch plates and then allows the clutch to slip. Basically the same as almost putting it in neutral, but when you re-engage it by letting it out, it engages smoothly. These allow for a little bit of slippage until you release completely, then they're engaged. So when the clutch gets old, it'll start to slip. When these springs wear out, it'll slip. And then when the clutch plates wear out, it'll slip as well, or it won't engage smoothly. It'll engage with a jarring motion. It'll engage like suddenly, or it'll slip, and then engage. And that's when you know it's time to change your clutch pack out. So just taking a look at these now. They don't look like the original clutch plates. It looks like someone's been in here and done this clutch before. But who knows how long ago, or if they used the right kind of oil afterwards. And so, this is one of the important things about doing your clutch. You want to make sure that when you replace the clutch, you go to put it back together, that you use wet clutch friendly oil. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and remove the 5 bolts that hold the clutch springs and the inner clutch hub on. Just going to use a 10mm socket for that. So you use a 27mm to get the nut off. I just have to tap away at the lock washer in there until you kind of back off the tabs enough to get the socket on there. Since I'm just replacing my clutch, I didn't inspect any of the plates or springs. I did inspect the basket to make sure that the grooves and gouges weren't too deep. If they are too deep, the plates will catch. So you do want to replace your inner clutch boss or your clutch basket if the pitting is too bad in the splines. You'll also want to inspect the push rod and the bearing on the push rod along with your cushion springs if you choose to reuse them. Before you reassemble everything, here's a quick look at the list of parts that you should have. Here's a quick diagram, it just shows how everything goes back together. There's an arrow. You can see they have the notches of the plates lined up with that. Alright, here's the inner clutch hub. We're just going to be putting the dot towards the top there. First you want to do a friction plate. Just want to make sure you want to get the top of the notch there to the where it lined up with the, want the notch there to be lined up with the top of the dot. After you do a friction plate, you want to do a steel plate, and then another friction plate, and then another steel plate, and then another one. And now between the second and the third steel plate, so we've got two steel plates in there. Between the second and the third steel plate is where you go ahead and insert your steel ring, spring ring, spring. Keep everything lined up at the top there. Keep our notches lined up at the top there. Third steel plate. Fourth steel plate. Ring spring with a friction plate around that, and the notches at the top. Got all our notches lined up at the top there. Another steel ring. Another friction plate. Last steel ring. And our last friction plate, which has no notches at all in it. It's just a regular friction plate, but with no notches cut in it. Okay, so once we get that all stacked together, we're ready to put the backing plate on. And again, it's going to have a little notch right there, a little arrow at the top. That arrow is going to line up with that arrow, which lines up with the arrow that's on the back. So we're just going to stick that right in there. And you want to make sure that these notches right here slide into those notches there. And then we'll hold that together as we're installing it. Just give it a little twist. It should slide right down in there, and that's the part you want to make sure is it sits in there. Now we have the whole clutch pack sandwiched together. We're ready to install it. Just want to keep an eye on those notches right there. Keep them all lined up as you're putting it together. And then as you're putting it up in the basket,